Close your eyes and imagine you're standing in a great stone cathedral. It's not necessarily any specific cathedral, but perhaps a composite of all the classics like Canterbury, Notre Dame, and St. Pat's. Your cathedral has that special feeling of a sacred space used for hundreds of years by thousands of people all seeking meaning. The ceiling vaults impossibly high as the light particles of our souls cascade through stained glass prisms, casting pools of warm-hued ambers and rose on the stone floor. You are in awe. And then the organ hits. Not a few notes on the flute setting, but the full organ. All the stops pulled out, bass notes pulsating under the organist's feet and rattling through every molecule of your being. It's the kind of sound that doesn't merely fill a room, but physically inhabits you. You are in awe. As you experience that ancient, sacred resonance, the processional cross appears, held high at the back of the nave. Behind it follow the acolytes carrying candles, the choir in their robes, and then the clergy in their golden vestments. Deacons and priests follow, the bishop last, yet dressed in the most ornate garments. They all move with the deliberate solemnity of genuinely important people, or at least people who think they're genuinely important. The congregation rises as the religious royalty pass. Perhaps you're awed again, but perhaps you shouldn't be. Now, I've loved the experience of a formal, traditional Palm Sunday service every time that I've attended one, and I've participated in high church services across dozens of traditions over the last 40, 50 years. And there's something in the pomp and circumstance and incense that resonates with me on a subconscious level, like an ancient human response to beauty and order, and a processional that signals this is beautiful and orderly. But then, almost every time, even lost in my reveries, I think about whose sense of what's important undergirds the holiday, and whose should instead. As people process in from the back of the nave, I shake the entertainment-induced trance and remember who's entering to the city we're supposedly celebrating on Palm Sunday. I think about where Jesus entered the city, the animal he rode, and what he was trying to communicate with it all. Because the processional 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem that we replicate in most of our churches today is not Jesus's humble entry, but Rome's massive awe because I'm afraid not to be in awe parade of power that was going on at exactly the same time as Jesus was entering from the other side of the city, without pomp, on a donkey. And at the time, it would have been recognized as the grand satire it was, something our contemporary church seems to have entirely forgotten. Jesus was a tremendous satirist, and his entry into Jerusalem that fateful Passover was his comedy coup de grâce. Today, Jesus would be hosting Saturday Night Live. I mean, probably the UK version, of course, because I don't think he'd be allowed into the US. But anyway, that Passover, because the Jews had been acting up and complaining about the jackboot of Roman oppression, the Judean prefect, somewhat similar to a governor, Pontius Pilate, arrived in Jerusalem leading a Roman military column in full pageantry armor on warhorses in formation. It was, and still is, the visual language of imperial power making itself look important and appear too big to fail or to challenge. The message wasn't subtle. This is who's in charge here. This is what authority looks like. Remember this. Obey the emperor, the Son of God. So Jesus knew exactly what Pilate was doing on the western side of the city. He'd spent his entire ministry puncturing the pretensions of empire, and he wasn't about to let this moment pass without a scathing commentary. Mark records it in chapter 11. When Jesus and his followers approached Jerusalem, they came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. Jesus gave 2 disciples a task, saying to them, "Go into the village over there. As soon as you enter it, you'll find tied up there a colt that no one else has ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'Its master needs it,' and he'll send it back right away." They went and found a colt tied to a gate outside on the street, and they untied it. Some people standing around said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told him just what Jesus said, and they left them alone. They brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes upon it, and he sat on it. Many people spread out their clothes on the road, while others spread branches cut from the fields. Those in front of him and those following were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest." Pilate comes in on a warhorse. Jesus enters on a borrowed colt. Pilate had soldiers in formation. Jesus had pilgrims and the poor who'd walked down from Galilee and were tearing branches off trees because they didn't have palm fronds and they couldn't afford to ruin their clothes. But some of them were doing it anyway. Pilate's procession said power flows from domination. Jesus' procession said power is not the point. Humble service is. And here's what it looks like. Then, of course, he demonstrated everything he'd ever talked about by entering what he and his followers believed to be the holiest city on earth on the most deliberately undignified animal he could find. That guy, I tell you. Jesus' choice, like all of his choices, is not accidental, and it's based on ideas he gets from the Bible of his era, our Bible's First Testament. Centuries earlier, Zechariah described a coming king as humble and riding on an ass, on a colt, the offspring of a donkey. Jesus is consciously walking into a prophecy his audience knew by heart, and he's doing it in the most comedically literal way possible. He doesn't borrow an older, more stately animal. He borrows a colt, young, untested, probably a little wobbly. The scene is genuinely absurd. And that is entirely Jesus' point. The Roman soldiers on the western side of Jerusalem would have found this, if they'd heard about it at all, either contemptible or hilarious. Probably a little bit of both. Within a few centuries, the empire that executed Jesus adopted his name, first calling itself Christian, and then adding holy, as if any empire can be holy. Somewhere in that wild, improbable transformation, most of Jesus' ideas and teachings were quietly altered. The bite was removed from his radical, anti-empire, pro-people teachings, replaced by gold vestments, incense, and an organization based on Romans' legions instead of Christ's communities. Because Rome refused to die, so did their hierarchies. Most churches still organize deacons before priests, priests before bishops, bishops before archbishops, and then at the top, in Rome, the seat of the empire, a man in white is still carried through St. Peter's Square on a golden throne to the roars of an adoring and loyal crowd carrying palm fronds, still worshiping an emperor. And every year, on Palm Sunday, that institution holds processions and services that look more like what was happening at Pilate's Western Gate, all while reciting, but apparently not understanding, the story of a man on a borrowed donkey mocking that very event. I think Jesus would want us to notice the irony. The empire always tries to eliminate or appropriate its critics, taking its challenges and making them decorative. It turns resistance into a ceremony, prophecy into pageantry, and revolutionaries into the institution's mascots. But Jesus didn't ride a donkey to fulfill a prophecy. He rode it to say, this is what the kingdom looks like. It empties itself. It serves and always refuses to exploit its own position. Kingdom people enter the gate that doesn't impress or oppress. The question Jesus' followers should ask on Palm Sunday is which procession we're attending. Because both options are always available. The Western Gate procession, it's very appealing, it's impressive, it looks important, and it confers status on those who fall in line. But the Western Gate also embraces a theology that keeps God safely distant and way high above us mere mortals, instead of intimately loving us from within, as Jesus suggests. The Western procession is about a faith that challenges nothing, compliance with the empire's economic order, and a spirituality that might well be very beautiful and very comforting, but poses absolutely no threat to the systems that are grinding people up just beyond the multicolored light beams of our stained glass windows. I find it a rather scathing indictment that our church's windows are more colorfully diverse than the congregations gathering inside. But we can still choose the Eastern Gate option, where Jesus enters and the people who can't afford palm branches spread their cloaks anyway. At Jesus' gate, the kingdom looks like borrowed transportation, a crowd of pilgrims shouting Hosanna, and a destination that is certainly dangerous. Hosanna, by the way, is not praise. It means save us now. It's a desperate but hopeful cry from people who need liberation and are choosing at real personal risk to place that hope in Jesus' countercultural yet entirely Jewish ideas about kingdom economics, where there's always enough. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone needs to suddenly stop their lovely processions, but if we walk in pageantry without acknowledging the sharp satirical edge of what Jesus was doing and why, well, then we've fallen into the empire's trap of making the radical safe, just like they did to Jesus. Hosanna. Where in your faith, your politics, your daily choices, have you altered the radical to make it safe? And what would it cost to stay on course with the radical donkey riding Jesus instead? Let's take a few moments to contemplate as we share communion with each other and enter into our sacred discussion.